Welcome D20 players. MCDM has dropped their latest playtest package and they have a name for the MCDM RPG now. It's called Draw Steel. We're going to take a look at the playtest rules and we are going to do some playtests here. So if you're interested in playing any of those, I'll announce those on the D20 Play Discord and on the D20 Play Twitter or X. Watch out there for any openings and jump into a game if you want to try it out. What is this game? It's about fighting monsters, larger than life, extraordinary heroes plunging into battle against terrifying, monstrous enemies. They talk a little bit about what it's not, but they give shoutouts to games that do a great job at these other aspects of gaming. Shadow Dark, Forbidden Lands, Call of Cthulhu, Paranoia, all great games. They talk about how they want it to be heroic fantasy, extraordinary people fighting dragons and necromancers, tactical, cinematic. They talk about that. And they also have a packet, Draw Steel cheat sheet. This is pretty cool. So the basics, role-playing, they talk about role-playing, talk about tests and power rolls. We're going to get into each of these, talk about edges and banes and how those work, talk about skill to test, easy test outcomes, medium test outcomes, hard test outcomes, a natural 20, giving you the highest tier effect. They get into combat. In this game, they have a resource called stamina. You could think of hits in other games, hit points in other games. This isn't your actual physical well-being as much as it's your overall stamina in combat. So it's a good name for it. It's you dodging attacks and being kind of worn down. But you can take a catch breath action and recover a little bit of your stamina a certain number of times per day. You're not like miraculously healing wounds. You're just getting kind of a second wind going. Distance are all measured in squares on the battle map. You start combat, and combat is two-sided. So you basically alternate between the two sides. You just randomly determine which side goes first and goes from there. Unless one side is completely surprised, then they would go second. Rounds, each side gets to discuss what their character is doing. A character can only take one turn per round. Round ends when everyone has taken an action. What kind of actions do you get to take in a round? Well, there's 3. You get to take on your turn one action, one maneuver, and a move for your character. So think action, bonus action, move in 5th edition, except that maneuver is a little broader than the bonus action. There's a lot of things characters can do with maneuvers, so everyone should often be able to use them. I am a fan of Shadow Dark, which is action move only economy, very simplified. This game, of course, is, as they say, more tactical, more cinematic. You're going to get a little bit more things happening. I think it's always a trade-off, right? Because I think Shadow Dark is cinematic in that your turns come up fast. You can do a lot of movement between that one attack. So it's just a trade-off on how you play the game. Your speed determines the maximum number of squares you can move on the battle map. If you're shifting, basically you're only moving up to half your speed, and during that movement, there's no opportunity attacks on you. Maneuvers, examples are aiding an attack, escaping a grapple, hiding, making a test, searching, standing up. Actions, catching your breath, that's where you get back some of your stamina. Charging, you get a free melee strike at the end of a charge. Defending, healing, taking a free strike, or using any of your abilities. Triggered actions. You can take one triggered action per round. There are triggered actions on your character sheet, and all heroes have the free opportunity attack triggered action that they can take. You have critical hits. If your power roll dice roll 2 10s or 1 9 and 1 10, you can immediately take another action. Now, I don't know if they intend for the natural 20 and the critical hit to be different. You know, the critical hit here is a 19 or a 20 versus a nat 20. And it looks like that's intentional. They didn't just miss it some of the time and not miss it others. So it'd be interesting to see the details of why they chose to go that route. It would seem to me making a nat 1920 always a quote crit, always best result, would not be too harmful and would streamline a little bit of stuff. Effects last until end of turn, end of encounter. It goes all the way to the end of the combat. You can make resistance rolls to resist an effect. You can also do rolls to end effects. Death and dying, when your stamina is at 0 or lower, you're dying. And you can't catch your breath at that time, although others can help you regain. You lose at 1d6 stamina whenever you make a test with a might or an ability score. Whenever you make an attack, use an action, use a triggered action. When you're less than 0 stamina, if that negative value reaches your winded value, you die. Forced movement, there'll be all sorts of forced movement in this game. Pushing is pushing away, pulling is pulling towards you, sliding is sliding anywhere in the battlefield. Vertical includes all the above, and you can go up and down. Stability is a characteristic that can resist that force movement that all characters can kind of gain as they gain levels. Escaping a grab, hiding, searching. The conditions in the game, it's a pretty short list of conditions. bleeding, dazed, frightened, grabbed, prone, restrained, slowed, taunted, weakened. So that is your quick reference sheet. And even in the quick reference sheet, they also go over for hero players, what are some tips to make the most use of your character. Conduit, Elementalist, Fury, Shadow, and Tactician are all provided in this playtest packet with tools to build those characters. There's also a pre-gen version of each of those characters in the playtest packet. And then there's a copy again for the director / game master / DM for the game. And it has some information about how you run minions, how you run captains, what villain power does. So nice little handy cheat sheet. File name on that is how to look cool while you're playing Draw Steel. I think that's the file name or something similar to that. So let's go back to looking at the rules themselves, the playtest packet. So we covered basically the game in a nutshell, but let's look at some of the highlights. So you have the game, heroic, tactical, cinematic. Well, let's look at the characteristics. You got 5. You got might like strength, you got agility like dex, you got reason like intelligence, intuition like wisdom, presence like charisma. No endurance here, so that's all just kind of built in the characters. And it's funny because that's just a stat every character wants. So this game and some other games just assume every character has a pretty good one. The dice you're going to need are 2d10s. You can get the 20-sided d10s. They're numbered 1 to 10 twice. Those roll pretty nice. You might also use some 6-sided dice, some 3-sided dice. Your power rolls, the 3 types. You got your ability roll, which is abilities are your like powers. You got your resistance roll. You got your test. To make a roll, you roll 2d10, you add your characteristic, your might, your reason, etc. There's 3 tiers of results, the power roll outcomes. You got tier 1, where you roll an 11 or lower. You got tier 2, where you roll a 12 to 16, and tier 3, where you roll a 17 or higher. Now, let's take a look at what those odds look like. This chart is comparing a 2d10 roll and modifiers with a d20 roll and modifiers. In the center column, this column K here, I have damage. And these damage levels correspond to the 3 tiers of a free strike melee attack. A lot of characters will do more damage than this with their free strikes, depending on what kits they have or what classes they have. But this is the baseline damage that you would do with each of your strikes. The tiers are on 2d10, 2 through 11, 12 through 16, and 17 plus. The unmodified odds on those different tiers are 55% for the lowest, tier 1, 35% for the medium, tier 2, and 10% for the high, tier 3. And if a 19 or 20 is going to give you a critical hit, it doesn't work the same in Draw Steel as it does in like 5th edition D&D. In Draw Steel, it gives you a whole nother action. In D&D, it does double damage. In theory, those are roughly the same. But a 19 to 20 is 3% odds on 2d10. Then on a d20, you get exactly the same unmodified odds by using the ranges of 1 through 11, 12 through 18, and 19 and 20. That gives you the exact same unmodified odds. On the 2d10 system, the modifiers give a little bit more bite. They're close, but they give a little bit more bite than if you're using a straight d20 system to do the same thing. Oh, and the straight d20, nat 20 is 5% of the time. So say you have a +2 modifier, which will be pretty common in the 2d10 system. You're 36% for tier 1 odds, 43 tier 2, 21 tier 3. If you used d20 and did +2, it'd be 45%, so 10% worse chance of, or more chance of getting the lowest result. Then 35%, and then 20%. So the high result's the same odds roughly. The odds of the crit's a little higher. The damage that you would do on average, taking these damage numbers, multiplying by these odds, and summing those numbers, would be, if you had nothing special from a crit, 5.19 at +2 or 4.80 at +2. And a crit is going to up that a little bit. So you can see, to get the equivalent of a +2 modifier with a 2d10 system, you need roughly a +3 modifier. With a d20 system, you can see it's 5.15 on average versus 5.19 on average at +2. So the rules talk about that. They talk about how the odds are a little bit better with a smaller modifier in the 2d10 system. The 2d10 system also has the advantage of, on a test, where one opponent's +2 and one opponent's -2, going to give a better chance of the expected result of that +2 modifier person beating the -2 modifier person more often than happens on a d20 test. So all reasons why they chose, I'm sure, to use 2d10. It also feels fine to roll 2 20-sided dice or 2 10-sided dice, especially if they have 20 sides on the 10-sided dice. Is that still d20 play if it's just 10-sided dice with 20 sides? I'm going to say yes. Okay, Next, we have downgrading of power rolls. So your power rolls can have results that get better and better, but maybe you want a lesser result for some reason. Let's take a look, for example, at that tactician pre-gen that they provide. Their kit signature abilities are net and stab. They do 7 damage and slow at tier 2, and 10 damage and restrain at tier 3. And if they wanted to, for some reason, slow and not restrain, they can go down 1 tier. You always have that option. They talk about natural results. They talk about a natural 20 in a power roll always gets you the tier 3 results no matter what characteristics is added to the roll. Later in combat, they'll talk about 19 through 20 giving you a critical, and that lets you take an extra action. So a little bit of confusion there. I'd like to see that kind of tightened up maybe and made the same if possible. Edges and banes are very similar to advantage and disadvantage, except they can stack to a degree. Like in 5th edition D&D, advantage and disadvantage offset no matter how many of each you have. In Draw Steel, the edge and advantage and disadvantage, edge and bane, basically can go to double edge or double bane, and then they stop. So if you had 10 banes and 1 edge, you'd have double bane. If you had 2 banes and 1 edge, you'd have just bane. So they offset 1 to 1 until you get up to a maximum of 2. And then how they affect your rolls slightly varies too. When you're making a power roll with a single edge, you add 2 to the roll. When you have 2 or more edges instead, you don't add anything to the roll, but you increase the result of the roll. So it'd be nice if that cleaned up to be more the same mechanic. A little bit confusing there. I wonder if there'd ever be a time I don't think there'd ever be a time you want to have edge instead of double edge. I think it still always works out. You'd always want double edge. Rolling with edges and banes, here's where they talk about it. It's just talked about there. Bonus and penalties happen independently of edges and banes, and you get bonuses from having skills, usually a +2 bonus. And you can see here, bonuses and penalty values are specified in the rules that impose them, calculated independently, and before. So if you have a +2 modifier and you have double edge, you might get from a tier 2 roll, your +2 modifier might get, or tier 1 roll, say you rolled to tier 1, your +2 modifier might get you the tier 2 result, and then you have double edge, gets you the tier 3 result. Hope tokens, nice little thing here. You get those kind of like you get inspiration in other games. You can spend them to immediately basically take a recovery when you take damage. And it's a pool. I like how they do it as a pool instead of in other games like 5th edition where everyone has their own individual inspiration. They can pool them if they want, but they don't have to. The game talks about building a heroic narrative, and the rules help do that. So the neat thing about this MCDM game, when we played the first playtest, was like you got your really cool abilities the longer the fight went on. Instead of novaing right at the start, you would build up to doing Nova type maneuvers, which is kind of cool and makes the combats more dynamic and end better, I think. They don't end in a long, drawn out slog of basic attacks happening. So what do they do to make that happen? You have victories, which you gain, which each basically battle during the day or everything you overcome during the day. Some things can grant you 2 even. Some big, huge obstacles can grant you 2 victories. And the more victories you have, the more you can spend those to do things with your character as you go higher level. Let's look at an example of what you can do. Here I'm looking at one of the pre-gen characters, the Tactician. And this is an example of how victories contribute later in combat base or later in an adventure. Your focus, the Ring of Steel, panics others but brings order to your mind, granting you a heroic resource called focus. At the start of a combat encounter, you gain focus equal to your victories. So the later in the day is, the more focus you'll start each battle with. And then as the battle goes on, at the start of each of your turns, you gain 2 focus. If an ally gets a tier 3 result in an attack against a target you have marked, you get another focus. And all those focuses disappear at the end of the encounter. And you can spend those focuses to do some of their heroic abilities, like, for example, the Tactician, Inspiring Strike is one, where you do damage, and you or an ally within 10 can spend a recovery. Heroic ability Hammer and Anvil is another one. That's where you do damage, an ally within 10 can make a signature attack with an edge against the target as a free triggered action. We didn't talk about free triggered actions and free maneuvers. Those are things that you can do when they're triggered that don't count against the one triggered action you're normally allowed. So your victories are going to reset when you take a respite. A respite is like a very extended rest, a very long rest, a very safe location, and that's where everything basically resets. You have had enough time to recover. When your victories go away, you gain experience, and that's how you'll gain levels. Like we saw, the victories can contribute at the start of a combat to your heroic resources, and then you can also gain them other ways. Each class gains them differently and spends them differently, and their value is different for every class. Recoveries, like we saw, you have stamina, which is like hit points, which doesn't represent exactly health, but represents more your resistance to being killed a little bit, your ability to dodge, your swiftness, etc. You can spend a recovery to regain stamina equal to your recovery value, which is 1/3 of your stamina. And the number of those times you can do that per respite is set by your class. Spending recoveries, you can do that during combat with the catch breath action. You can do it outside of combat as often as you want. You regain those when you finish a respite. A respite is a 24-hour, uninterrupted, doing nothing but sleeping, eating, dressing your wounds, recuperating. You can change your kit. And I've always been leery of the kit situation in MCDM, draw steel versus just having, picking up individual things. I pick up a sword, I pick up a bow, I pick up this armor. And only being able to change it when you get to a respite feels weird to me. It's kind of an abstract thing with this game. That's just how it is. I always thought, well, why can't I just pick up a bow and shoot someone? Well, you can. The game does have it where everyone can take a free ranged attack, and that just represents you picking up a bow and using it. So, not my favorite thing about the game, but I kind of understand how it works, and it works okay, I think. When you finish a respite, you regain all your recoveries and stamina, and your victories convert to experience. That's the basics. Then they go into Orden and the Timescape, and there's a lot of very cool stuff with the world here in this system. So I would definitely recommend jumping on the Patreon, getting the playtest material if you want to read into that in more detail. Find a game to play in. And also watch the D20 Play Discord, D20 Play X, and I'll be announcing some games. Okay, so that's the basics. That's kind of how combat works, how abilities work. Let's look at a little bit. Negotiations the same as the first playtest. I won't go into that in any detail. Let's look at making a hero. So if you're making a hero, they have 5 pregens, and you can also make any of those 5 classes. They have some of the basic stuff for those first 5 classes in here. What are those classes? They are Conduit, which is like Cleric, Elementalist, Fury, which is like Barbarian, Shadow like Rogue, Tactician like Warlord from 4th edition, maybe Battle Master from 5th edition D&D. So those are the classes you can make. They have ancestries, and there's a bunch of them here. You got Devil, Dragonite, Dwarf, Elf, Woad, Elf High, Hakon, Human, Mamonek, Orc, Polder, which I think is their halfling, Revenant, Time Raider. I'm thinking of Time Bandits. I wonder if it's like that at all. So there's a whole bunch of ancestries they got here for you to pick from. Creating a culture. So think of like heritage and ancestry in Tales of the Valiant. Because just, who your parents were doesn't necessarily influence what skills you have. That's how you grew up. You could have had ancestors that were dwarves and grow up with elves and have some different knowledge, some different skills. So they have cultures, then they have careers. Let's look at careers real quick. So each career is going to give you some skills, some languages, some renown, some project points potentially, a title. An example career is an artisan where you get 2 skills from the crafting skill group, 1 language, 100 project points to spend building things. You have a title, you're an expert artisan, which has some game effect. And you have some sample inciting instance. This is just an idea of why you started venturing. And of course, you can come up with your own too. And then classes. Let's look at the Conduit class. You'll want to grab the Patreon playtest or play it and see some of the other classes. Conduit, Light Cleric, basics. What do you get for your class? How do you start? How do you get your starting characteristics? I didn't even cover that. You start with an intuition and presence of 2, and then you can do your other 3 scores using one of these 3 arrays. It's really set by your class. Starting stamina at first level, 18. So think of 18 hit points at first level. And of course, you can go to -9 before you die. Stamina gained every level after, 12. So at second level, you're up to 30. You have 8 recoveries. Each one of those gets you back 1/3 of your stamina. So that means you can almost fully heal up 3 times. Almost 3 times. Choose 2 skills from the interpersonal or lower skill groups. And then your advancement. First level, second level, third level. They provide, I think, just the first level things here. So we'll go through them. And your abilities. And so first level features, deity and domains. Choose a god or a saint you revere. And then you're going to pick 2 domains from their portfolio. And here's some sample deities and portfolios. Then you're going to gain piety, a heroic resource called piety. When a combat encounter begins, you gain equal to your victories. That's why victories are important, and pushing forward through a day is important. At the start of each round of combat, you gain 2 piety. It's not clear to me, are you just going to gain, let's see, it's combat round, or combat number 4. So you've been through 3 combats, you got 3 victories, you start with 3. On round 1, do you now have 5? I'm not sure, that's not clear to me. Use the prayer ability to gain additional piety. This prayer ability is kind of neat. It's a maneuver, so you basically can do it every round. But it's set up so that it works really well the first time you try it and gets more and more dangerous the more often you try it. So the first time you use this ability during an encounter, it has double edge. So you're going to get basically one higher result. So you can never do anything but gain 1 piety or better. You also can use a domain effect, and those domain effects we'll go over that in a second here. Second time, you have an edge, so you're going to get +2 on the roll. Third time, you have a bane, so now you get -2 on the roll. Fourth time, each subsequent time, you have a double bane. So if you roll really well, you get one piety. Any roll of effectively 16 or less, you're going to go down a tier, you're going to get damage and bleeding. Domain effects. Whenever you get the tier 3 result of the prayer ability, you can choose one of your domain's effects to immediately take effect. So creation domain effect, you create a 5 wall of stone within 10 squares of you. And fate one's pretty good. Choose another creature you have line of effect to. That creature automatically gets a tier 1 or tier 3 result, your choice, on their next power roll. So you can do it on an enemy, you can do it on a friend. Looks like they don't get any resistance to it. It's just going to have that effect. That's pretty strong. Okay, now we come down to first level domain feature. And let's just look at alertness ward. You exude a magic aura of awareness, granting you and each ally within 2 squares of you an edge on tests that use the alertness skill. And there's a whole bunch of samples here. Okay, then everyone's going to get, you gain the following ability, which you can use once on your turn. Healing Grace. It's a maneuver. Your divine energy restores the righteous, range 5, self, or an ally. Target can spend a recovery, and if you spend PD, they can get other effects. PS Force, range of 5, you're going to do some damage. Triggered action, that's a action. Choose one of the following triggered actions. Divine Disruption, Holy Infusion. Then you have your conduit abilities. You get a signature ability. Select one signature ability from the options below. So you can pick Holy Lance, Lightfall, Sacrificial Offer. Let's look at Holy Lance. A tendril of divine energy shoots forth to draw in your foe. Range of 5, target one creature or object. You're going to do holy damage on pull 2, pull 3, pull 4. Pretty strong. And then we come to heroic abilities. You make use of a number of heroic abilities, all of which channel piety to empower them. You start out with one 3-point ability. Let's look at Punishing Smite. Your Divine Fury is a hammer that crashes down upon the unrighteous. You're going to do holy damage and prone, holy damage and prone, and can't stand till the end of their turn. Righteous Rebuke, 3 piety. Then we have 5 piety abilities. Let's look at Armor of the Faithful. Divine Light of Protection surrounds your allies. Targets 3 allies. Gain 10 temporary stamina, 15 temporary stamina, 20 temporary stamina. That operates a lot like temporary hit points in 5th edition. Temporary stamina does. So there is the Conduit class. You'll have to want to pick up the Patreon packet for their classes. Let's look at some kits. So you got martial kits, caster kits. You can change your kit on a respite. So the Cloak and Dagger kit. You wear light armor, wield 1 or 2 light weapons, gives you some stamina, some speed. That's strong speed there. It's going to increase damage from melee weapons, damage from ranged weapons, increase weapon distances to 5. That's range, 5 range. And mobility. When an enemy ends their turn adjacent to you, you can shift up to 2 squares as a free triggered action. And it's shifting, so it doesn't provoke. It's free, so it doesn't count against your other triggered actions. Signature ability Fade. So you make an attack or a power roll plus might or agility, do damage and shift 1, damage and shift 2, damage and shift 3. So that is your Cloak and Dagger kit. Shining Armor kit. A nice boost in stamina, plus 12 at first level. When you're getting 18 and you put this on, now you're up to 30 for the Conduit, for example. Although a Conduit's probably going to want to have a caster kit. Stability bonus, so you're harder to push around. That's handy. No speed bonus, so you're not as fast. You're doing more damage all the way around with your weapons. You have protective attack. You can taunt others. Let's take a look at a caster kit here. We got the Ward Weaver. This kit gives you a stamina bonus of 6, stability bonus of 1, so you're going to be harder to push around. Energy Siphon. It is an action, range 8. You do psychic damage, and you gain damage immunity 1 until the end of your next turn. And you get all the way up to a damage immunity of 5 until the end of your next turn with a tier 3 roll. And then each of these kits has a ward with it. Repulsive ward for this one. When you or an ally with an area of your ward take damage from another creature's melee ability, you can push that creature a number of squares equal to your highest characteristic score. So those are some kit examples. Complications. When I saw this, I was a little bit leery because I don't like how some games where you can buy complications or drawbacks and boons and such, people, really gamify that where they got a really good boon and a drawback that really never came into play. I like how this one's doing it where they're putting them together. So like, for example, the double deal complication, the benefit is whenever you're present for a battle in which all the characters on one side are not surprised, Your side goes first on a result of 4 or greater on D10. That's pretty strong. Normally it's only 6 or greater. Drawback, the Archdevil occasionally asks you to defeat enemies on their behalf, and if you refuse, they'll come after you. So I don't mind that kind of complication setup. That works pretty good, I think. Talk about when to make a test, tests in general, adventuring. We've talked about most of this with a quick reference sheet, abilities, and combat. And I think we talked about the combat round with a quick reference sheet a little bit. One side goes first on a 6 or greater, and then you alternate turns. And that really makes solo type creatures fare much better. They don't go last and get nuked out of existence with that kind of a setup. Now, you can have some difficulty where it's a debate every single turn and it takes forever for the player's side to decide what order to go in. So anything you can do to help that along is good. You can have some sort of indicator system where the players who want to go first can indicate they're ready right away. And the ones that are ready to go last can indicate they're going to go last. So I have a way I do that in Roll20. You can look at my MCDM RPG Roll20 setup to kind of see how I did it for the first playtest. I'll do the same thing for the second playtest. The taking the turn, we talked about you have a move, maneuver, and an action. You can trade. You can break up your movement. You can turn your action into a move, action, or a maneuver. So you can have 2 moves and a maneuver, 2 maneuvers and a move, or action, maneuver, move. Talked about triggered actions, free maneuvers, shifting, a lot of movement types. I mean, it's a very tactical game, so they go into a lot of detail about movement types for sure, and force movement. And one aspect of the game I really like is the slamming into other creatures, or slamming into objects and taking damage from that. Under the maneuvers, one of the maneuvers they have is aid attack. Choose an enemy within your reach. The next attack and should be an ally makes against the creature before the start of your next turn has an edge. So you can basically help someone you're fighting with. It doesn't choose an enemy within your reach. Do you have to stay within your reach? Doesn't say that. I would assume no. The way it's written, you don't have to stay there. Next attack, an ally makes against that creature before the start of your next turn has an edge. I don't think in most cases in this game you count as your own ally, so you can't use that to give yourself an edge. I would say no, since everything else that mentions ally only works on you if it also mentions self. The defend action is pretty nice. All attacks against you have double bane till the end of your next turn. So that's strong. If you take, I'm surprised it's not start of your next turn. So if you take defend, the next turn you're attacking, you're still getting the benefits of being defensive should you trigger an attack opportunity somehow. No benefit from this action while another creature is taunted by you. This does have the advantage that everything ends at the end of your next turn. There's nothing that ends at the start of your next turn in this game that I've seen so far. So that's nice. Nice consistency there. The game talks about a lot about end of combat and how combat can end on things other than just whittling everyone down to a stamina of 0. If you want to be cinematic, you don't want to do that in games necessarily. You want to have some sort of climatic end. And if it is going to be everything's knocked down to 0, they do have a dramatic finish thing. If it's going to end, the director can assign each hero to 1 or more of the remaining enemies and say what they do. You know, do they kill them? Do they let them live? Do they capture them? What are they going to do? The last stand stamina is another way. If the party wants to fight to the bitter end, you can drop everyone to 1 stamina. And then they just start knocking them off at the end there. And then the negotiation system is tightened up a little bit from the first playtest. Pretty neat the way it works overall. I would definitely get the playtest packet, check it out. There'll probably be one in the playtest that I'll run, so it'll be neat to see how it all works in that. That is the Draw Steel playtest packet. Huge changes. They've done a lot more work on this. I can see. I'm excited to go look at the adventure and get that ready to run. So let me know how it goes for you guys. If you had fun playing at Gen Con, I'd love to hear that. I'm going to try and get James on for another interview on live interviews. So you can come with all your questions for James. I'm sure he is busy as you can be right now, so that'll be great if he can join us. I understand if he can't. Look forward to seeing you all next time. If you see me at Gen Con, say hi. I'll be there wandering around the whole convention. Bye, everyone.